Time now to dig into some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Auditor John Dougal and former Salt Lake County Mayor Peter Kroon. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate you having you here.
Great to be here.
Let's start off with tax reform. We've had now some time to digest the plan and take a look at what types of impacts it might have. John, let's start with you. Your thoughts on this tax reform plan put forth by legislative leadership?
Well, one of the challenges of tax reform is there's always an element of ideal tax policy and popular tax policy, and how do you combine the two and get adequate support from the public. So I think there's some aspects of this plan that are really good, and I think there's others that are going to be a heavy lift and very difficult for the legislature to move forward on.
Okay, we will get more into those in a minute, but Peter, let's bring you in now. Your thoughts as you've had some chance to kind of look over this and have it sink in a little bit.
And I think the state realizes it needs to rebalance its tax policies because its general fund is starting to not be able to keep up with population growth and the demands. But at the end of the day, citizens don't like new taxes, and adding taxes on services is not going to go over well, and there's going to be a lot of pushback from those groups that are going to be taxed now that weren't before.
Yeah, we definitely saw the masses come out when we were taking a look at HB 441, but they've scaled back quite a bit on which services may be going. Want to talk to bring you back in, John, and talk about one thing though. Legislative leadership, the governor is saying, look, we're looking at expanding this base, but overall we're looking at a tax cut. Your thoughts?
That's usually what you have to do. If you're going to get the public to support something, you have to give a net tax decrease to the overwhelming majority of Utahns. And that's going to be the key balancing act as they go through this process, is how many folks are going to get hit with a tax increase and how many are really going to see a tax cut through this process.
We're seeing a lot of the focus put on the food tax at this time. They're looking at reinstating the food tax. Peter, what type of impact could that have?
Food tax is a tax on the poor. It's a regressive tax. It's something that we got rid of got mostly rid of because of its detrimental effect on the poor. And I really don't believe that we should be taxing the necessities of life, food that people need to live on. I'm fine taxing luxury goods and other things, but in terms of the food tax, I think it's a bad idea.
We've heard the chairs of the committee that looked into tax reform say, yes, we're looking at this increase, but we're also taking these steps to make sure that the vulnerable aren't hurt through credits and whatnot. Is that good enough when you talk about a food tax increase potentially? Well,
back in 2005, that's what the Senate wanted to do. The House at the time thought they needed to do a cut on the food tax. And mostly, I think all the low-income advocates also said the credit's not going to work. So many of those folks are not filing taxes. They're not going to see the benefit of a credit. Just do it at the register.
Tax policy is not something that can be handled just like that. It's very complicated. Do you see this actually going through in a special session the way it sits now, or do you think there's more work that needs to be done that will be pushed beyond that?
I think it's going to be tough to get this done during a special session. Generally, these big items are handled in the general session versus a special session. And I think, although on the flip side, it gives the legislators a greater chance to spend more time on it in a special session, but I think generally it should wait for the general session.
John, this is something you've been involved with at the legislature yourself. Do you say though that maybe we can see some of this passed in a special session and then the rest of it pushed off to the general?
If we look back at the last time we did major tax reform, we did some in a special session and a lot of it in the general session. I think there's some aspects that are pretty straightforward for the legislature to tackle, like cutting the income tax rate. That's pretty straightforward. Sometimes some of the more complex issues, people are going to want to wait for the general session where there's more vetting and more discussion about that process, and we'll have to see what shakes out.
All right, one last question for each of you on this. Is there a need to go through reforming this, the system at this very moment?
I think we need to start looking at reforming the system because of what's happening to the general fund and the current taxes not being able to keep up. But right now we have a robust economy. There's a lot of money coming in, so I don't think now is the time.
Peter's talked a lot about the general fund. Where the problem really is in the transportation fund. The gas tax is dying, and Utahns need to figure out how do we want to fund infrastructure going forward. We flagged these concerns back in 2003. The legislature has taken some steps to address them, but that is the really serious underlying issue that needs to be addressed. It's not fully addressed in this proposal. We got to get serious as Utahns to say, how are we going to fund it when the gas tax dies.
One of my concerns is the income tax. They're talking about cutting the income tax to balance it out. Problem is the income tax goes towards education. Our state does not adequately fund education at this point, so an income tax cut would be a mistake.
Well, the governor has also made it very clear if we're going to remove that earmark, which you're talking about there needs to be a steady fund flow for education funding in the state. I want to move on to property taxes because Utahns all across the state are starting to see those go up. Several entities across the state have increased taxes. More looking at it here pretty soon. You've been there before as a county mayor. Talk through the process of property tax increase and when it might be necessary.
Well, it's necessary when you can't pay your bills anymore or there are a lot more demands. Now, in a robust economy, the local governments are probably saying this is a good time to raise taxes because people are doing well and can probably pay more taxes. Also, in local governments, when the economy is good, that means that people who work in government want raises. Otherwise, they can go back into the private sector. Health insurance costs are going up, and most of the cost for local governments is the people that work there. So at some point you have to raise taxes because you have to pay increased wages, you have to pay increased health insurance premiums. So probably now is a good time to look at that, although when everybody starts looking at it at the same time, then it's a cumulative effect and people aren't happy.
John, you're a Utah County resident. Your county is looking at a significant increase. Your thoughts as they go through that process?
So one of the key things is first, I think most Utahns view property tax as the most hated tax in the state. That so many feel like they don't actually own their property when there's a property tax. I think the Utah County Commission is going to really have to explain the necessity of going through this process and such a significant increase. There's been little bits that we've heard at this point, but I think generally the public doesn't know why they have to take such a drastic step.
Okay, we're coming down to the final days now. On Tuesday, a new mayor will be selected for Utah's capital city. Peter, what are you watching for as we come into the final few days on the mayor's race?
Well, you look at fundraising, first of all, because that's usually a sign of how the candidates are doing. Erin Mendenhall's had a lead in the fundraising race, and the polls show that she's slightly ahead as well. So that's usually a sign. There are two great women who are running for office. First time we have two women running against each other in the final election. So I think either one of them will do a great job and look forward to working with those people in the capital city.
John, as a conservative from Utah County, what are you watching on this race?
I think probably the key thing many conservatives are looking for is they're not going to get a mayor in Salt Lake City that starts screwing up the whole state. They want somebody who's going to be an even keel for the capital city of the state, somebody who Republicans can work with. And I think either candidate.
I was going to say along those lines, do both of those candidates fit?
I think both those candidates fit that bill.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of key issues in Salt Lake City that aren't really issues, if you will, in Utah County and other parts of the state, but those are the issues.
But
of the
as
city.
the capital city, obviously, it can have an impact on the entire
Absolutely.
state.
One of the issues in this race is the fact that a state legislator is coming in to run the capital city. And if you think about it, the last two mayors have been former legislators, and there's been some friction between the council and those former legislators as mayors. So that is one of the things that's being discussed with Luz Escamilla being a former legislator, while Erin Mendenhall is a current city councilwoman.
Yep. All right. We will watch.
Isn't Luz current?
Yes, she is. We will watch to see how that plays out. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.